Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this month's Training Tuesday. Today's topic is extending table transformations and components with XSL. We're going to look at using XSL to create complicated design elements that your users can edit as snippets or components. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode as this session is being recorded. If you have a question during the presentation, please use the Q&A function found at the bottom of your screen. We will attempt to address your questions during the presentation. After the formal presentation is ended, we will review and answer all remaining questions. Your presenter today is Robert Kiffe, Senior Technical Support Engineer. Rob, it's all yours.
Thanks, Erica. Welcome, everybody. I know we've got a lot to cover today, so we'll probably need all the time we can get. So be prepared to go the distance here. All right, so first thing that we want to just jump into is, well, welcome. My name's Robert, and I've been with the company for about 8 years. Been all around doing implementation, support, training, so hopefully I can impart some of this knowledge with you guys. Anybody that was at the conference, some of this might be familiar, but I tweaked it a little bit to be just different enough to get something new. So anyways, let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and share. All right, and let's jump into my PowerPoint here. So first thing is that we are going to just take a look at why we're talking about this topic, and then go into basically what our solutions are today. And then we'll talk about a little bit about the XSL and kind of the concepts behind what it is in the XSL that allows us to make additional logical choices and extend capabilities of these solutions to meet all your particular needs. And then I'll basically run you through kind of my strategy for building these things out. And then we'll do a hands-on, and hopefully I can kind of run you through my process as I do it. So that's what we're going to be doing today, and then hopefully we'll have time. I'll stick around, of course, if you guys have questions. And of course, you can always follow up with support tickets or send me an email directly. Anyways, jumping into it. So what's the challenge? What's the kind of the problem? It's not really a problem, but what's going on? There just happens to be that as websites get more and more complicated, more and more dynamic, functionality of your website, fly-ins, fly-outs, JavaScript content, stuff like that, it ends up becoming a challenge to maintain some of this directly in the WYSIWYG. Perhaps there are some hidden elements, so maybe there's some attributes that just aren't normally editable in the WYSIWYG that you need to be able to change. And so how exactly do we manage that stuff? So let me just quickly show you an example. Here's a progress bar. I like to use this one all the time as an example. This is from Bootstrap. If any of you guys have frameworks or your websites are built off of a framework, either Bootstrap, Foundation, some of these things will be familiar with you. They provide you kind of a kitchen sink of cool gadgets and things that you can throw on your page, and they provide default styling for. Now, people with custom design sites and stuff like that, usually they'll give you an example of a bunch of different content pieces that you can then use in your templates that are already pre-styled and pre-configured. So kind of a similar idea, but I'm just going to use Bootstrap since that's easy enough. So if we take a look at this progress bar here, we can see that ultimately the output is basically just going to be this particular bar here, and it's kind of ugly by itself, in a big content region, but usually there's going to be some other content structure to it. But the idea is that you want to be able to change what percentage is shown in this particular bar. So if you take a look at the code, you can see down here in the div class progress that there's a bunch of stuff in here that just wouldn't necessarily, be managed in the WYSIWYG. So for example, we need to change that value we need to change that value for accessibility purposes. And then we also need to change what the label actually shows in there, so that there's also a visual representation of or an exact value associated with the visual percentage of the bar. So there's 3 spots that need to be updated, and if you were to try to do that in the WYSIWYG, it just would be a little bit difficult. So basically, what are our options for doing something like this? So the first one, and this one I've been waiting for a long time, and I'm very excited that we have it around, it's components, of course. We previously did table transformations, and those still have value and purpose, and I'll get into that briefly. But components are really, really nice because they provide a nice solid user experience that gives you a full form-based editing experience for your regular content editors to fill out the content that then would get transformed into the final HTML that you want. So this way, you can kind of create basically any complex HTML output, but without having to go into special server-side code and JavaScript, etc. Or especially here with XSL, you can perform a lot of cool things without having to go into that. Now, our particular session, of course, we want to go into that, so we'll get to that later. But components by itself do offer a level of allowing you to do this without having to do the XSL. So for example, if we have our component, I have a snapshot here. On the right side, you can see I have the source code pasted into the kind of the output of my component field. And we can see that those 3 percentage places, I've basically just kind of vertically aligned it, are now we want to basically swap those for my form field that I've kind of pre-created here. That is the percentage value. So if I basically just drag and drop that field in, then I can basically just have the output get pushed out with the value of the form field. And that looks kind of like this here, although I don't have it highlighted, but you can see that when you enter the form, there's a preview here that it will show you that those particular 3 fields will get updated. And if you can see my mouse cursor, then you can see the 75, the 75, and the 75, and that would basically just come from that one field that the user fills out. So it's a nice, really easy experience for your content editors to fill out, and then they get a really nice, looking component that goes onto your page. So that's kind of the idea with components. Now, let's take a look at our other option, which is table transformation. So this is our kind of our classic way to do this before components became available. And so why did we choose tables? What was going on with that? Well, the idea is that we were trying to find another form-like option. And tables are, it's a little scary. We kind of have this thing where, oh, don't do tables in your design. That's, obviously, been moved on regarding design-wise and stuff like that, but tables are still good for storing and holding content. They still have their purpose there. And the idea is that we're not going to output the table itself. We're just using the table to store the content in your page. So here's an example of that same progress bar, but as in table format. So here we have, our little table header that says percentage, and then we have a table cell that just basically lets us put in a value. Then you can see this example here. That's all the HTML that you'd need is just this table thing. Now, reason tables are nice in this, besides the fact that they're just good data, for holding data, they're also pretty robust in the WYSIWYG field or the WYSIWYG region. If you basically backspace up to it, it's pretty robust. It's not going to delete the whole table. You'll have some kind of structure examples, and if you, let's say you have a particular table that you can kind of add more regions to, it's really easy to reorder, like copy the row, insert the row, stuff like that. Now, not every particular snippet you would want to do that, but those become available to you depending on what you're trying to achieve. So that's the idea behind the tables. And again, we're kind of going for a form-like, view, a visualization to this. And the thing though is that we need to convert that table to different set of HTML. So this is going to require that we do XSL work. So that's the advantage of components, is that you may not necessarily need to, but a table transformation definitely does. So let's talk a little bit about how the XSL works for this. So I'm going to take you a little bit of a background and try to be as brief as we can about this. But basically, we are essentially using XSL in analogous to a server-side language for most CMSs. So it allows us to do a lot of our template processing, logic, and just overall, content transformation to our final page output that then gets published to your production server. And the advantage of all that, of course, is that it's all happening on our servers. It's not something that's happening on your page loads, so that can help speed up your page load speeds and stuff like that, because you don't have to wait for that processing to happen. It's happening on our servers when you publish it. If we look at the history of XSL though, like it was originally created as a way to transform one XML structure into another XML structure. So there's a little bit of a history there that I'm going to kind of skip through a little bit. But the idea is that XML was created in a way that it was kind of an open structure. You could have whatever data and constructs that you wanted for your particular application, and maybe another application would have a slightly different data structure. So if you wanted to kind of convert your data so that it would fit into another place, then you would use maybe some XSL that would then just kind of reorganize it into the new data structure. And in our case though, we're using XSL to transform our content into HTML. So how does that kind of look in the big picture? Well, we have, let's say, our XML pages, right? We're working with PCF extension, which is technically just an XML page. And we have some content regions that store the actual page content. And then that page gets processed via XSL. And the XSL acts a little bit like a glue. It's basically, or like the template, so to speak, it is. And it then builds the whole rest of the page structure. So it'll bring in the global header, navigation, etc. All these things it fits in place. And one of the main benefits here is that it does do a separation of your content from your design. So therefore, all your pages in theory should have just the content that's specific to that page, whereas all the other portions of the page that are more global and uniform across from page to page, those should live or at least be constructed by the XSL. And then that way you only have one place that you would need to go modify to affect your whole site. So there's that advantage as well, of course. But what I wanted to focus on here is this idea that we're taking XML, like individual pieces of content, and we're transforming it into a bigger HTML picture here. And in a sense, that's exactly what we're doing with table transformations and potentially more advanced components. We want to take simplified content and we want to then have the XSL do the extra work to convert it into your fancy final output. So how does that happen? How do we get it to transform that content? Well, we have to do a little bit more research into some of the core concepts of XSL, and that is what's called apply templates. So kind of a brief background on this, so bear with me for a few minutes here. If we have, let's say, some XML structure, I've got a profiles root node with a couple profiles in it, Bruce Wayne and Tony Stark. And if we have this particular structure and we wanted to, let's say, iterate through the profile nodes so that we could hit all of the different superheroes that might live in this profile structure, we could do an apply templates instruction to the profile node. So what does that look like? That looks like this. So maybe I want to build a list of them. So I have UL, and then inside that I'm going to do an XSL apply templates, and I'm going to select inside the profiles root node, I'm going to select the individual profile nodes. And that inside that select statement is the XPath expression that lets me navigate an XML structure. And in this case, it's very much like a folder structure, folder file structure, where you have a node representing like a folder, and then you can do a slash and go inside and get to the children elements and stuff like that. So in this case, I want to iterate through all the profile nodes inside this profile structure. So that's great, but what happens to that when I iterate through? Well, by default, XSL is going to basically look for a template that matches that particular element that I'm iterating through. And so I basically need to write somewhere else in my XSL. So this is, imagine that maybe lives on a different page or something like that. But imagine that I have somewhere else in the XSL an XSL template that matches a profile node. So in this case, this is a template rule, is kind of the official term for it. And in this case, I'm matching the profile element itself. And therefore, when I match that, I'm going to build the list item and then dump in the name of that particular profile. And that way I can build out basically a list of the people in that profile list. Now, what happens if I don't have that template match that matches the profile node and I'm still iterating through these profile elements? Well, by default, XSL is going to do a text copy. So basically a value of, if you're familiar with the XSL terms here. And it's basically going to take all the text contents all the way through and ignore all the XML structure, and it'll just paste it in. So usually when you do apply templates, you want to make sure that you have a template that matches all of your particular elements that you might be iterating through. Therefore, you get the intended consequence, or you get the intended results, consequences too, of the transformation that you're looking for. So how do we then, make this work for us with the WYSIWYG regions? Well, first I need to tell you one more thing, and that's the fact that you can actually have multiple template rules that match you can have multiple template rules that match any given item that you're iterating through. So for example, if we still have that same list of profile data, and then this time I have that same template that matches a single profile, I can also write in my XSL another template that matches a specific one. And so how do I know which one of these is going to actually get matched and then processed? Well, that's going to follow a basic rule set. So this is just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind here. So first of all, there's going to be a mode that you can use. And some of you might have seen this in some of our older implementations, but this is a great way to kind of, if you wanted to match, let's say this profiles, and let's say iterate through and create like a table from them, like so you'd have a table row, then maybe you would add a mode to your template match that says table, mode equals table. And therefore, when I'm building a table, I'll iterate through the profile nodes, but with a mode of table. That way I know that it will hit my template that matches profile in the table mode, and then create a table instead of a list item. So little side tangent there. But that's mode, and we don't, you won't see that too often, but it is a pretty powerful tool should you want to use it. That's not really where we're going right now, though. What we're going for next in our order of items, we'll get to it, but the next one on the list is import precedence. So this is actually pretty important, and this has to do with where these template matches live in your XSL structure. So in most cases, we have, let's say, your XSL importing, or excuse me, your PCF is going to call interior XSL, let's say, and from there it's going to import other XSL files, usually like common XSL, and then common XSL itself will then import, let's say, variables.xsl and template matches, etc. And we have kind of a generic structure that we've been using for a while now. So if anybody is unsure that their particular setup doesn't match here, you're free to check in. But the idea is that each XSL that's imported has basically a lower priority than the one that it was imported from. And so therefore, as you chain out template rules that you place in those other XSL files lose priority as they the farther out in the chain that they live. So you can use this for overriding. So let's say in common you define a template that matches a profile node, but then you have in your interior, which is called directly by your PCF, a template that matches profile. That's the one that will override the one in common, and with no other settings or anything like that. Finally, you get to, let's say that they have the same import precedence and they have the same mode, then it goes to priority. And this is actually an attribute that you can install directly on your template. So if you want to just ensure that if you have two that might match the same thing, then you could add a priority to one so that when that particular edge case does match both, then the one with the higher priority will take the lead and get selected to be transformed. So that's always useful. But what we're looking for here is this particular last and following rule set, and that's that there's basically weighting that happens, like a weight that happens based off of the specificity of the XPath expression. And if you're familiar with CSS, it's a little bit like how IDs, when you're matching an element with an ID, the hashtag, ID name, that's going to have a higher priority than if you were to match a class dot something, right? So in this case, what happens here is that because if we take a look back at my templates again, if we notice that this profile, the second one, is basically being filtered for a particular name, that then means that it's going to have a higher priority than this profile one here. So in this case, this second template match would win out, and we can see that if it is a profile that has the name of Bruce Wayne, then we get to add our little ASCII bat in front of his name. So, so that's just kind of a core functionality of XSL, and the way that it plays out is that we need to basically just make sure that you're doing an apply templates to your content regions instead of a copy of. A copy of is a deep copy, and it will copy the content exactly as it is and drop it in. And what we really want is we want it to be an apply template such that when we go through, basically we're triggering an iteration through the contents of your editable region, we're looking for templates that match that content. And in those cases, we can basically write template matches that match certain content things, and we override kind of the default template match. Now this goes back to something that I kind of skipped over a little bit, and that's that, remember, by default, if there's no template that matches it, it will do a it will do a text copy. But what we ultimately wanted to do is we wanted to do a shallow copy in the sense that it's going to make a copy of the element that has no specific match, and then it will apply templates to its children elements and go down the chain, basically looking for elements that have specific template matches. Otherwise, it will just copy out the structure as is. And that's something that I can show you when I get into the XSL, but basically there's a line of code, 2 lines of code specifically, that you'd want to use to allow you to get that type of behavior. And I'll show that to you in just a bit. But the advantage there is that allows us to write these particular template matches that will then find specific code pieces and target them and then basically transform them in the flow of your content region. So that's a pretty powerful ability of the XSL, and so we'll basically see how that will apply in just a minute. So how does this
before you go on, it looks like we have a question.
Yeah, I see a question here. So the question is, does the order of templates in the same file affect precedence? As far as I've tested, I don't think the order necessarily matters so much as the import priority. Now, all things being equal, it's possible that it might pick either the first or the second. I don't remember, but usually you don't want to write it in a way where that would ever happen. You'd want to find a way to make it specifically choose one, because you don't want to have unintended consequences of getting the wrong one. So, so I guess an unanswer to your question is that try not to get yourself in that situation. So let's take a look at the, that is a good question though, sorry for not answering that, but we can test it if you want. But for now, let's take a look at our kind of overall picture for how we can do this particular solution. So if we consider, you know, that we have some content, that we know what that content structure is, we can kind of take a look at it beforehand. That's kind of your first pre-step here. But the first thing that you want to do is you want to figure out the best data structure to represent the content for that final HTML output. So whether that's going to be something that you do in the component, so you're building a form in the component, or whether that's a table snippet and you're trying to figure out your table structure. So in this case, I highlighted the component way to do it with the progress bar. I'm going to show you the table transformation version here. So we have a table, right? We saw this one earlier with the field. Then we're going to take the example output code. So we're going to copy that. And we're going to basically either paste it, if you're doing a component, you're going to paste it into the component source output. Versus if you're going to do the XSL, then you're going to create a template rule or a template match that then matches the particular table or potentially the component output. And then you just basically copy and paste in that hard-coded content as it is. And then that's a quick and easy test. You just preview it, make sure that you get your transformed you know, content, even though it has the placeholder content for now. That at least gets you the first step of making sure that your template match is working and the XSL is transforming the table into the content. Then the final step is that you're going to basically take the that content structure and you're going to grab the content and put it into the final output. So in this case here, that looks like this, where I create a variable that basically does some processing of the table cell, and then down below I dump in that variable that has stored that value into the appropriate places. So similar with the component, you basically just did a drag and drop, and that was, you know, considerably easier than what we just did here. But this is basically the same example, but with the table transformation. But yeah, it's just those 3 steps, and so I'm going to go ahead and just demo those particular steps in just a second. But first, last and final thing, I'm going to do run over a couple tips and tricks. So first is components. That's for more advanced processing, which I can demonstrate later. You can actually output your component as XML, and then that makes it really easy for the XSL to pick up. You just match that specific node that your component is outputting, and then you can process it really easily from there. However, you can also do an output as HTML, and then you can use XSL to target and process child contents, and I'll show that in just a second too. So here's an example here where we're basically having a special template match, and based off of the XPath expression here, even though it looks like I'm matching the div, what's actually happening is that that's a precursor. So that's basically I'm specifying, I'm looking actually for the image that is a child, any descendant basically of that particular div. So it's kind of a prerequisite. I'm only looking for images that happen to live inside a div with the class of card. And that allows me to specifically target and process pieces of a component that may or may not have the right content. So there was a question earlier that you could get an error if you have templates that match the same. We can certainly verify that in just a second if you want. But in general, the template name, like there's named templates, and if you have 2 of the same of those, you'll get an error. So if there are Yeah, we can check on that, but there's a chance that if you have two templates of the exact same rule set that matches, then there's an error. There could be an error. We can test it out though. Table transformations. So more tips and tricks on the table transformations. You want to choose a table layout that best matches the content. So for example, if you are doing, let's say, an accordion or something like that, you might want to have unending content rows. You can basically have a new row for each accordion item, and then that lets you go down. However, you might also, let's say, like a profile type thing, maybe you want to turn it a little bit more into a form, and you want to have on the left column, you might have the label field, and then on the right is where you actually put the data. So you can kind of vary your table structure depending on the way that content might be best processed, or at least matches the order in which the content shows on the page. Furthermore, you can also add custom styling to your WYSIWYG CSS. So you can basically go in and add styling that only appears in the WYSIWYG that then makes that table look specifically like, let's say, a form or something like that. And the way you find that out is you just view the source of your PCF page. You look at what your content regions editor tag says here, and you're looking specifically for the CSS path. And this is from my little demo here. It's sitting inside a workshop folder, but usually yours is inside the _resources folder. And then lastly, if you want to know and see more examples of some table transformations, we actually do have a public GitHub example code section just for table transformations, and it'll even have some of our styling for our tables. So feel free to go check that out and play with what's in there if you want. Okay, so let's go ahead. Oops, missed that. I was supposed to go to the, let's take a look. Let's go ahead and just poke into the content here, and let's take a look at what I've got set up. So first of all, I've got some stuff prepped ahead of time, but basically I have a little mini Bootstrap template. And ultimately, I basically just went to the Bootstrap documentation and I just started grabbing examples and then pasted the code in place. So for example, we can take a look at this sidebar content right here. And you can see that it's literally just the HTML structure that I've just copied and pasted in. We can see that it's basically, it's just a div with a class card. We have an image in there. There's a div class card body, and then we have some content in here. Now, this particular structure seems okay, and in most parts, it actually does work out pretty well in the WYSIWYG. So if we just take a look at that real quick, you can see it holds up okay, but it's pretty easy to, delete something and then lose the whole div and stuff like that. So maybe you, or at least you just don't want people to be able to have the ability to change up that structure too much. So perhaps this would be a really good opportunity to make this into a component. So before I go into that one though, the other one I wanted to show you real quick is the columns. So right now we have one editable region here, full width, or not full width, but for the end to the end of the page here, and yet I have a column 1 and a column 2. So how did I get that? If we take a look at the source code again for there, you can see that I have Bootstrap's basic grid system. So I've got a div class row, and I've got a div call medium 6. So that way at the medium breakpoint and higher, it's 50-50 out of 12. So basically it's a fraction of 12. And then for smaller breakpoints, then it basically goes to a full row, which is nice for responsive design. And ultimately, this might be something that I might want to have be a little bit more robust in the WYSIWYG region. So this would be a really good opportunity to either do a component or a table transformation. Now in this case, I could do a component, but then I have individual WYSIWYG regions for the 2 columns. And that doesn't really give me a good in-context preview. So while I'm editing at least. So this actually might be a good case for a table transformation. So if we wanted to then convert this into a table transformation, we can do my 3-step process. This is the code I ultimately want. I need to figure out my content structure, a table, right? So I can even put that right into my table, or excuse me, into my content region right above it. So I'll just start, whoops, there we go. And I just want to put in and make sure that there's a unique thing that I can target, that it won't target other things by accident. So usually with our particular table transformations, we put an OU dash, and we have some styling that hooks up for that. So I'll just do columns, something like that. And hopefully I don't hit any specific styling. We'll see what happens with that. And then I'm going to put in a caption, and this allows me to have like a little kind of friendly text heading because we've styled it that way to just tell us that this is a columns snippet or something like that. And then we get into our normal table structure. So in this case, I'm going to start with the T head actually, and I'm going to do one table row with 2 table headers. And in this case, I want to have just the columns indicated a little bit better. So column 1, and let's just copy paste that. And make that column 2. And while we're at it, you can either go into the WYSIWYG CSS, target this particular class, and make sure that your columns are equal width and all that kind of stuff, or I can cheat and I can just do it right in here for now for the sake of time, and I can actually just make that 50%. And then the other column should just auto snap in, but you could hard code it if you want for that one too. Specifically, if you were going to have, let's say, different style columns, maybe you might want to have a couple different settings in there. But in this case, I'm just doing a 50-50, so it should just balance out. So then I'm going to come down to my T-body, and I'm just going to have one table row with 2 table cells in there, table data, and that can just be content 1 and content 2. So basic table structure. So that's my step 1. I have my content structure. So the way that that's going to look in the WYSIWYG, I click edit. Here I have my column snippet. I have column 1, column 2, and then you can see the content just lives in there. So I can come in and add more content to it. Blah, blah, blah. You can see that that's a little bit better representation of how those columns will actually look when you're doing your editing. Now you could do some more styling to kind of make that, not cover so much of the, or indent and stuff like that, but we're not going to go into that right now. But problem is that that's still outputting a table. So that leads us to step 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down, and of course when I saved it, it kind of reformatted my my code here. I just happen to know it's this div row that's down here. So I'm going to go ahead and shift tab that after I highlighted it, and it'll just kind of format it for me. I'm going to copy that, and this is where I need to go to the XSL to make something happen. So this is a particular mini workshop that I have. Normally you would go to your _resources, XSL, etc., and you'd adjust it there. But in this case, I have a separate XSL file in this particular subfolder. If anybody wants this, let me know, and I can get you this little package to play with. But I don't really want to leave this page right now. So the best way to do this is I'm going to just either right-click and duplicate this tab, or you could, middle-click and open, a link in another tab, etc. So we'll just do this the visual way. And I'm going to navigate now to where my XSL lives. So I happen to have it just in a folder right outside. And then just to take you through a quick recap, here's my interior XSL. You can see that it's importing common. But you can also see that my basic page structure here is using the supply templates. So that's what kind of allows us to do this whole template match stuff. Again, going back to what we talked about earlier. And so then if we basically follow my XSL chain back up, I'm going to slide out here. I go into common, and you can see that we're importing a template matches file. We can also see down below here that this is also where we're building our basic page structure. Your XSL structure should be pretty similar, but you're going to have a lot more XSL files and stuff. This is a very pared down version. So following that chain, I'm going to go up into the shared, and then I'm going to go into template matches XSL. And you'll see this is where we have our specific code instructions to convert the template matches into what we call the shallow copy. Note that when we do this for a mode that doesn't have a name, like what we're doing here, we also just need to make sure that we have this template that matches that PCF style sheet declaration, and that just helps us ensure that there's no false positives when we do the template matches. I can get you a better explanation if you're interested, but for now I'm just going to skip through it, and just know that you can basically go into your template matches, or sometimes we have a Snippets XSL, and you can basically just start writing template matches that match particular pieces of your page content. So in this case, I have a little spot here that I'm kind of set up, and I'm just going to go ahead and add mine. So I want to target specifically a table, and I'm going to specifically match one that has a class of OU-columns. Okay, and then I'm going to basically just paste in that div structure, and that's step 2. So basically what I'm going to do is just copy and save that. I saved in place, and that allows me to then save and preview. And now you can see that I get a duplicate set of columns here. So rather than that table that we were originally outputting, I'm getting now my copied content. So I know that this particular template match is working. So now the step is that I need to figure out what that table structure is and pull in the content into this particular spot here and this particular spot here. So the way I do that is just our traditional template, XSL code, and we're going to do another apply templates because we want to continue that chain of, just in case the content inside there needs to have more stuff transformed. And I'll just self-close it for now and come back to it. And now I need to target those particular table cells that store the content. So if we review the table structure here, we have right here our table. We have the T body, we have a TR, and then we have those 2 TDs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back. I know that my current context is the table, so I can already just go right into the contents. I know that the T body is the next element, and I can go right into then a TR. Now, if you did have more than one, you can use this little filter to grab a specific table row. And then if you're looking for a specific table cell, you can grab them by the order. Now, you can also add in your XSL, or in your table snippet code, you could add some other identifiers if you really wanted to, but in this case I'm just going to use the position. So the first table cell will go in the left one, and then I don't want to grab the table cell itself. I actually want to go inside and grab its children elements. So this node is a kind of a universal selector that will let me choose all of the children elements of the TD without choosing the attributes of the TD. So that's kind of a nice trick to do so that you don't get your table cells in your code. If you notice that you're getting random table cells in your output, this is probably what you're missing. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that and paste it into my other column. And in this case, same table row, but this time a second table cell. So I'm going to go into that one. And then now I can save this and preview my page. And as you can see now, I'm getting my content. And if I want, then I can basically convert that into that heading 2, just so you can see that what I'm doing in there is modifying my output. Now, I still have this extra thing in here, and that's just because I have that example code hard-coded in here. I can remove that now. And I have just my snippet. So now I can take this and take that code and convert it into a snippet that's now reusable. So there's your example of a table transformation where it might make more sense to use a table instead of a component. So that being said, let's go and take a look back at this card that we have in the sidebar. This isn't a good example where it probably would be nice actually to make this into a component. So let's go ahead and take a look at that code, and let's do the same process for our component. So here I'm going to slide down to my sidebar region. I'm going to find my code that is the card that I've set up. I'm going to just format it to make it a little bit easier. And I'm just going to copy and save it. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to make another tab again. And this time, I'm going to make it this middle tab. Well, no, I'm going to make it, yeah, I'm just going to slide it into the middle. I'm going to use this extra tab that I've created to go to components and create a new component. And I'll call this sidebar card or something like that. You could do like contact info, etc. So I create it, and you can build out your form. You can do that three-step process. In this case, I'm actually going to reorganize my steps just because I have it in my clipboard, and before I forget, I'm going to quickly just go into the source view, and I'm just going to paste in that particular content. And just a side note while you're here too, is that you want to make sure that when you're bringing in content from other sources, you want to make sure that your content is well formed, because even though you're putting it into a component, it's also going to be dropped into your PCF page, which needs to be in an XML syntax. So if you have an image, you need to make sure that it's self-closing. If you have like a form that you're building or something like that, the inputs need to be self-closing, stuff like that. So it's just another thing that you just want to keep in mind. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just save it, just have it in there as is. And then I'm going to come back to my form elements, and I want to build what's in there. So we can see that we have our image, we have a little title, and we have some text, and then some button stuff. And I think maybe in the interest of time here, I might keep this a little bit short. So let's go ahead and just do an image chooser for now. You can either drag and drop it in, or you can click on it. And I'll just go ahead and do that. For now, I'm going to make it not required, but keep in mind that if you did have a particular structure and you didn't want to do XSL, then you might want to consider making certain fields required so that when you build the HTML output, you don't get broken code. And that'll make more sense in just a second. So I'm going to go ahead and just save. You can do other things like file types, etc. I'm just going to leave it for now. But just know that that's a really nice feature, that you can make all these advanced settings to your fields, so that way you're really ensuring that you're getting the right product. So we have an image. We want to have, let's say, a text field for the title. And then we want to have a little description. So maybe I'll do like a bigger text box, long text maybe. And we can make that maybe like 2 rows. And then for the button, that's where maybe I will leave it out for now, but we would want to have a button text, and we want to have a button link. So for now, I'm going to leave it out and just leave it hard-coded. And I'll demonstrate the XSL side of stuff with just the image later. So here we have our form preview, image, title, description, and we can see our final code. But we need to actually have, when something comes in here, we need to have that updated. So what we need to do is we need to go back to our source, and then this is where we're going to basically drop in the content from our form. So I can just basically highlight where I want it to go. I'm going to replace this silly place kitten placeholder image, and I'm just going to drop in the image field just like that. You could have a separate field for your alt text, for helper text, and you can make it required, etc. In this case, just because I'm lazy, so this is always a good practice to demonstrate for everybody, but I'm going to reuse the title that I have from below. So I'm just going to throw that title into, oops, I didn't highlight that. I'm going to throw it into my alt field, and then I'm also going to reuse that same title field right in this H5. Now, this is where, you know, maybe there's some header nesting that you might need to consider. I'm just going to leave this for now. And I'm going to drop in the description area, the description. Okay, and you can see that we would just continue that for the button. We drop in a file chooser for the href, and then maybe the text for the button right here. So you can extrapolate from there. Now, in this case, this is actually something where if I go back to the source view, I forgot to update this. This is one that actually might be nice to display as a preview. So I'm going to go ahead and set that. Then we can come back and we can fill out the text. And you can see that that title is getting brought in both of those locations. So we know that our particular component is working. So I can save that and launch it. And I'll just do kind of a version 1 for now. And let's go now to our page. And let's try and throw it into our sidebar. And I'll just put it in on top of this one. So here we have that. And I'm just going to go ahead and insert. I can basically undo that paragraph and then insert my component sidebar card. I put in an image. Just go find something real quick. If I can spell my school name here. Meanwhile, I finally take a look at the the questions here, and it looks like somebody was wanting the link to the GitHub. Yes, I can post that. Let me just grab it real quick, and I'll put it in there. I think that goes out, but if you still need it, we can find another way to get it to you.
These sort of sample code and resources will be posted along with this video afterwards on our support site, and we can include a link to the GitHub as well with that.
Okay, so as you can see, we have our component here, and it displays nicely in the WYSIWYG, and you can basically kind of just click on it, and you'll see that the little component drop down. You can edit it and change it, and everything looks good. So this is a great example of a component, but let's say that we don't have that image filled out. Now we get a broken image indicator. Okay, and so what if I wanted to be able to use that but without having to specify an image? So this is where you could kind of do some fancy tricks. You could maybe have like a choose checkbox to put in like a display yes, no. You might still get some accessibility errors or W3C errors for not having an image with the text and stuff like that. So in reality, we want the XSL maybe to convert and you know, do some extra logic on top of this. So what I can do is I can go to my XSL again, and I can come down, and I can basically, if I remember what that content structure was here, this div structure, so if it helps, I can open it, oops, cancel that. I can open it up and view the source. I can take a look at this structure, and I can potentially write, as long as this, I feel that this is unique enough, then I can basically target it. So if it's not unique enough, then I could add something, you know, maybe something, you know, that's not going to get any styling. You could even do like a data attribute. Something like this, something targetable, however you want to do it. But in this case, I'm just going to simply target a card because what I want to do is simple enough. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that same thing that was in the PowerPoint example. I'm going to do a match for the div with a particular class of card. Okay, and I don't want to stop there. Like I could rebuild the entire card with this template match, but I don't really want to do that. I just want to target a subchild of it. So what I can do is I can do this kind of quick selector that lets me go and choose like any descendant of the div element, and I can look for the image, let's say, that has an href attribute href that is empty. Okay, and in that case, actually, I don't want it to do anything. So if I self-close it, then that essentially will match it, but not do anything there. If it helps, you can also do this, where you basically open it up and you just have it right in a comment. Now this comment is for XSL, and so it won't actually get pushed out. But you could just say, you know, do nothing. Basically, don't write an image if it has no href. So if we add this and save this, and I just saved in place, and I come back to my preview, apparently I didn't match that right here. So let's make sure. Oh, that's why. I used the wrong attribute. We're looking for source. And yes, thanks. I'm getting ahead of myself here because I'm trying to rush. My bad. Somebody just noted that I should be doing this properly here, where I'm looking for the class that has card in it. And then I'm going to look for the @source that is empty. And so now let's try this again and see my process here for fixing it. And now you can see that it should just basically essentially just remove that image. And now I don't have to worry about a broken image, and I don't necessarily have to have a required field that requires that particular thing with an image. So it now becomes an optional thing. So the question is, do components generate only static HTML? Can they be data-driven? I'm not quite sure what you mean by data-driven. So in the sense that static HTML, yes, the component, when you output it, you're choosing static content that it's going to be pushing out. You know, you can basically inject in the elements, but there's not going to be any additional logical steps in here in this version of components. Now, there are plans to augment this and maybe add some repeatable fields, stuff like that, and then there might be some more behaviors that you can basically set up depending on how your forms are filled out. But I can't really talk about that now until that's available. So for now, your options are that you basically use kind of inline stuff for just as a demonstration. Let me show you the accordion example. So here I've kind of pre-created an accordion, and if we take a look at the source for this, I've created XML output, and in this case I have, in this show field, I have a radio checkbox. So if I come back over to here, you can see that this show card option. So if I go into the preview, so if I save it and preview it, you can see that there's this yes or no here. And that basically affects this little, maybe if I zoom in a little bit, that'll help you guys. That'll affect this particular element in here. So you could imagine that this would be, let's say, a style, and maybe the yes is, you know, or the no would be like a style display none or something like that. So you could, in theory, affect some output based off of the advanced field of a particular element. So if I go to the show card option, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to the form elements here, go to the show card. You could go to the advanced options here, and instead of just dumping a yes or no, you could actually have it write out, let's say a whole style equals display none type thing. So there's some fancy stuff that you could do with just, you know, no XSL logic, but we wanted to kind of demonstrate the XSL side of stuff. So here's the final example that I wanted to show, is that with the accordion, I have a data structure here. You can see that it's pushing out XML content. And the way that you want to think about this with a component is that right now, without repeatable fields, you would need to have more than enough fields to fill out however many accordion items that you could possibly want. So if you thought that you might have 10, then you'd want to at least create 10 of these fields. And there's a bunch of fields that you need to do, you know, for each one. And in this case, the accordion is not too bad. There's basically 2 items, but I have a third that is a selector that lets you do 1 or more. And I can quickly add more. So I can just go to this copy And so now I have another one, and I could basically rename that real quick to be card 3. And then I can go down here and I can do the header, and I'll just do the content again. So now I have another header, another content, and I could just quickly edit these things to be for the third item, and save that. And then now I can go to my source, and I can essentially copy this and then just change this to be the third item. And it looks like I didn't save my 3 there. So let me just go ahead and fix that. Oh, I copied the instructional text, but I didn't copy the show button. That's my bad. So copy that show card. And then that I changed to 3. Okay, so now I have the instructional text, the show option, the header, and the content. I save that, come to the source, and now I can drop in my show 3. That's going to be header 3. And I didn't move my cursor, excuse me. Content 3. Save that. And now I have an accordion with 3 items. And this is not an accordion yet. This is outputting XML. This goes back into the, the fancy version of this. So added I can launch that, and I can come back to my page, my test page here. I can go inside here. I can insert this component. And here it is. I can fill it out. Oops. And let's say I say no to that one. Okay. In preview, I have it set so that it doesn't display anything. I hit save, and then I get a dump of this, and that's because I don't have the specific template match for that particular XML structure. So if I view my frame source of my page, I can see that it's actually dumping out that XML exactly as I want it to be. So I have 2 with the card show yes and 1 with the card show no. And so then my process would be, I now have my data structure, right? So now my process would be that I would come into my XSL. Okay, I'll zoom out just a tiny bit there. I'm going to write my template that matches the accordion element itself. And I can then, as my second step, I can take the accordion code. Now, what's that supposed to look like? Let me take a side tangent. I have it set up on this page right here. So if I just come in here, I can grab the accordion code right here. Let's just format that real quick. I can copy it. There's a lot of stuff in here. I can come back to my XSL, which is over here on this tab. Excuse the runaround here. And I can paste this in. So I have template match accordion, and then I'm just dumping in. This is phase 2. And I can test this now by just clicking back to my page and previewing. And you can see that I have my accordion code working. So the XSL, like I didn't have to change the component, or the XSL is handling all that. And so therefore I would need to go into my phase 3 where I now need to grab that XML structure and put it into here. Now I've kind of ran out of time for that. I can basically get you the final code for that. But as a quick recap of what I would be doing is I would be remembering the XSL structure. So I probably want to do, one, I have to kind of evaluate this code, and I need to figure out what's getting created for each of the cards. So here's one card, and that's why I kind of named it that way. Here's the accordion item 2, which is a card. and here's 3. So basically I would leave it down to 1, and then I would basically for each and run through my elements in the data structure and build out each accordion item from that stuff. And from each one I have a heading and I have a content area. So I just bring that stuff in. Then the other things that you need to keep in mind is that some accordions are much less to manage. They're usually just a class. But in the case of Bootstrap, they make use of these specific IDs and stuff like that. And that's where you can do some more advanced XSL to maybe generate an ID value. And this is a nice little function of XPath built in that will basically allow you to create, it's almost like a random number generator, but it's not exactly random. It's a little less than random. But basically, if you give it a seed, which is like, in this case, the dot is referencing the currently matched element, it will do its best to try and create a random element sequence of characters that you can use as like an ID. It's safe for an ID value, you know, like a HTML ID. And so therefore you can basically inject it into your stuff here, so that you can basically say, just in case this particular heading 1, you have more than 1 or something like that, you can throw in your ID, and then it'll make that particular ID then unique to this particular accordion. So there's some cool stuff that you can do just from that. And of course, this could be done with a table transformation as well. You would just iterate through your table rows, etc. So I'm going to stop there since we're kind of going over time here. Does anybody have any questions that I missed, or still any open questions that you want me to answer while people still want to hang around?
Okay, that doesn't look like there's any questions, so we can wrap today's session. Oh, wait. Yes, there's a question about the slides. All of the slides will be available. And Rob, if there's any, is there starter code that you're going to make available as well?
Yeah, I can post the starter code, and then I can also have my, well, how about if I just give you my final code? Would that be easier? I think that's probably going to be easiest.
Yeah, so so the video will be posted later today, along with the slides and a package of starter code, as well as a link to our GitHub. So that will all be available later today.
And I'll finish up the accordion so that you can see that in action. Okay, well, thanks everybody.
Yeah, and so next month's training, so like I said, everything will be posted on our support site. And for next month's Training Tuesday, it's going to be on May 28th, and we're going to talk about configuration files, such as you might have for some of your modules. So keep an eye out for that. Once again, OCN or support site will have information about upcoming Training Tuesdays. And one last thing before you go, don't forget to fill out the feedback survey. We love hearing from you, and it helps us tailor our Training Tuesdays to what you want to see. Thank you everybody for attending, and have a great rest of your day.